Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well on this Tuesday, April the 14th, as we come together again virtually on Facebook Live this morning for another morning chat with me. And just hope you had a great weekend. I'm sure it was a very different sort of Easter celebration, and for you, as it was for me, just being with some immediate family, and that was it. Nobody traveled, everyone was here, and we stayed safe over Easter, but had a good celebration and a good time. And I did something this year I haven't done in a little while. I actually dyed Easter eggs, which it's been a while since I did that, and I think they came out kind of nice. So we had some fun with that, and the weather was really nice, beautiful and sunny, and just had a quiet but a good Easter. So I hope you did as well and had a meaningful Holy Week. So good morning, Tracy. Good to see you on again this morning. And Barbara, good to see you on also. And Jim, hope you're doing well. Good morning to you. And Marilyn, hope you're doing well also, and you and your family. We are moving into this new week. Yesterday I didn't make it on. I was having, we had a fierce storm, as I'm sure everybody did in the immediate area. We had some electrical and internet problems, so just didn't make it on yesterday, but wanted to be back on this morning. So as we continue our look through the Gospel of John. A couple of things, though. It's a busy week in some ways for us this week after Easter. We have several Zoom meetings lined up, church-wise, denomination-wise. Things are constantly in flux with the COVID-19 pandemic continuing. Had some hopeful signs yesterday and today about perhaps we always have to say that 'cause we're not sure. Could be that the worst of it may be passing us at this point, and but that doesn't mean that we go back to normal anytime soon, is what I'm hearing, that they will roll out businesses that are able to more safely operate than other businesses might. So for instance, the example I heard was that construction, if you're in the construction business, that may be able to start up more immediately, practicing still safe practices of 6 feet away and so forth, and just being careful wearing masks. And so the construction industry, a lot of that takes place outside, so that is another factor as well. So that might be able to start perhaps sometime in May, and there's other related industries and businesses that might be able to do that. But unfortunately, things like restaurants, things where people are publicly gathering together, and I think, now I didn't hear this, but that might include church as well, unfortunately. So we don't know what the future holds right at this point, but we are hopeful that the worst has passed, and that at least in this part of the country, Governor Cuomo again is talking about how deaths are starting to subside in New York City, and hospitalizations are starting to. And but again, this is the time to remain even more vigilant. And as I heard someone on the news this morning say, we have to double down on our being proactive and taking all necessary precautions. So now's the time not to let up, but to continue doing what we're doing. And we will do our part here as leadership of the church. And we will continue to virtually offer messages and, of course, virtual worship on Sundays. We have a Sunday after Easter, the second Sunday of Easter, planned for this coming Sunday at 9:30. That will be a worship movie that we will be rolling out. A lot of that we're working on right now. It's very odd kind of trying to be 1 week ahead of everything. I'm so used to doing things in a certain way and preparing for sermons and worship service when they're live, and I find myself now, I'm already thinking, not this coming Sunday, because that's been worked on, and we have a plan for that, but now the following Sunday and the Sunday after that, trying to come together with some ideas with our staff here at First Church. As I said, it's a busy week for us as far as Zoom meetings go. Some of our leadership will be having a Zoom meeting with Bishop Scholl today at 2:20, I believe is the time, and Bishop Scholl has invited some of the leadership of the church to speak with him at that time. Also, we're having a special charge conference this coming week, Wednesday, that will be taking place at, I want to say 7. And that will be to talk about our involvement in the federal government's loan program, which we do need charge conference approval for. And so that'll be taking place this week as well. Other than that, we are as I said, moving forward, we are continuing to find different ways to get the message out to you. I continue to use the PhoneVite program online that enables me to reach those who don't have computers, don't use internet, and I send occasional messages. The last one I sent was an Easter message to them on Easter morning. We had fun doing our resurrection eggs with the children over the course of last week, and I intend to reach out to our young people as well in this time. And our youth group continues. We have virtual youth group meetings happening on Sunday nights and on Wednesday for Bible study as well. So Kathy Clauges is continuing that. So it continues to be an unusual time as we move forward, and just want to try to bring the ministries out to you as much as we can and find different ways and think outside the box, as I've been saying, in trying to just do things a little bit differently. So good morning, Cecily. I see you're on, and I did miss some folks too earlier. Let me just get rid of this screen. There we go. Who else was on here that I missed? Beth Fisher, good to see you. Robin, I see you're on as well. Mike Graham, good to see you, fellow Giant fan. Chrissy from one of my former churches in Wyckoff, good to see you, and I hope you and your family had a good Easter. So that was great. Chrissy was part of watching the resurrection eggs that we did every week with her son, and they made this neat picture, I guess. They were drawing the eggs and what was in each egg, and every day that changed, and so that was kind of fun to follow along with. Kevin, good to see you also. Hope you're doing well. And our district superintendent's on. Hector, good to see you. Hope your family is well, and you had a good Easter also, and hope everyone is staying safe. And Max, good to see you. Glad you're on this morning also. Best to Beth and your family also. So as we are continuing now our march through the Gospel of John, we are in the 7th chapter. Now, just to give you a little bit of an update, because I wasn't on yesterday because of the internet issues with the storm, we were in the 7th chapter. We made it up to the 24th verse in chapter 7. And this portion, we found Jesus having this engagement with, again, with his followers and with the religious leaders and the unbelief of his brothers. And we talked a little bit about what that term brothers may mean. And prevailing view is that Jesus' brothers were actually his brothers that were the children of Mary and Joseph following Jesus' birth. And then we spoke about Jesus at this festival, the Festival of Booths, also known as Tabernacle, and some of what was going on there, and Jesus using comparisons with Moses and so forth, and we talked about that. So we're entering into this latter part now of chapter 7 in the 25th verse, where there is some question about who Jesus' identity is. And as we spoke about when we started this run through the Gospel of John, John is very focused on who is in the know as to who Jesus is and who isn't. You'll see that theme repeated over and over again. There are those who know about Jesus and know about his signs and his works, and those who are blind to it in a sense. So that theme will continue. So there's this discussion about, is this really the Messiah? Is this really the Christ? So let's start with verse 25 and see what the text brings us today, as I have a little bit of coffee. Now, some of the people of Jerusalem were saying, is not this the man whom they are trying to kill? Is not this the man whom they are trying to kill? This is the people of Jerusalem, and the words that are used here, the expression here in the Greek suggests that it's actually the residents of Jerusalem who are saying this, and not those pilgrims who are just there for the feast, who have come to Jerusalem special, but the actual residents of Jerusalem are wondering, is this not the man whom they are trying to kill? And yet here he is, speaking openly, but they say nothing to him. So if they're trying to kill him, he's speaking openly, and yet the authorities are not doing anything about it. So that gets them wondering, I guess. Can it be that the authorities really know, there's that word, know, that this is the Messiah? So they are speculating that the authorities do know this fella is who he says he is, and yet they are still trying to squash him and keep him down and not let his message get out. And then verse 27, yet we know where this man is from. We know where he's from. But when the Messiah comes, no one will know where he is from. looked into this part a little bit. There was many different thoughts back in Jesus' day as to what the Messiah, what events would take place, or what knowledge there was about the coming of the Messiah. And there was a thought that the Messiah would just sort of appear, and that people wouldn't really know where he was coming from, and they wouldn't have necessarily any advance warning that this is the Messiah. There was something written by a Rabbi Zerah in one of the ancient rabbinic texts that is a piece of wisdom I thought was interesting. 3 things come unawares, this rabbi writes. 3 things come unawares. A found article, so in other words, you lose something, you come across it, you didn't anticipate it. A found article, a scorpion. Scorpions sometimes hide and then they just sort of appear, and you're in trouble if they're like in your shoe or something like that. So a found article, a scorpion, and the 3rd thing is the Messiah, is what this rabbi wrote. So 3 things come unaware. So there's this tradition in Judaism that the origin of the Messiah is kind of a mystery, and don't know when or where Messiah will show up. But of course we know that there are other passages that indicate that there is some understanding of how the Messiah will appear. And Matthew chapter 2 lets us know that the Messiah, of course, was to be born where? In Bethlehem. And so it's important to remember that these messianic expectations in the first century during the time of Jesus, they weren't all the same. There was a lot of variety there, a variety of viewpoints that didn't necessarily cohere with one another. So here we have a feeling on the part of the residents of Jerusalem in John chapter 7 that when the Messiah comes, no one will know where he is from. Then, beginning in verse 28, we're going to hear more about that too in a second. Jesus then cried out as he was teaching in the temple, and Jesus said, "You know me, and you know where I am from. I have not come on my own, but the one who sent me is true, and you do not know him." Again, Jesus is getting into this who knows and who doesn't, right? Who knows and who doesn't. But the one who sent me is true, and you do not know him. Verse 29, I know him because I am from him, and he sent me. Then they tried to arrest him. So these words that Jesus is offering here are taken to be blasphemous in some ways, that what he's basically saying is, you don't know the Father, but I do because the Father sent me. So they tried to arrest him, it says, but no one laid hands on him because his hour had not yet come. And that's another powerful theme in John's gospel, this discussion of the hour. When is the hour when Jesus will be lifted up? And lifting up has that double meaning in John. Lifting up literally on the cross, being lifted up, but also being lifted up and raised on the day of the resurrection, as we just celebrated 2 days ago. So his hour had not yet come, so no one laid hands on him for that reason. Yet many in the crowd believed in him and were saying, when the Messiah comes, will he do more signs than this man has done? So there's doubters in the crowd and there are believers in the crowd, and friends, that hasn't changed. That's always been the case. So there are some who are saying, well, he must be the Messiah. Look at the signs that he's doing. And again, in John's gospel, these signs, these semea, are everything. They point to who Jesus is. They point to the glory of God being shown or revealed, as John says, through the Son. In verse 32, the Pharisees heard the crowd muttering such things about him, and the chief priests and Pharisees sent temple police to arrest him. So again, the Jewish leaders are getting very nervous about this, as they've been for a while, and so they send the temple police to arrest Jesus, trying to put a stop to all this and stop this nonsense about him being in the know as to who God is and they're not in the know type of thing. So verse 33, Jesus then said, I will be with you a little while longer, and then I am going to him who sent me. You will search for me, but you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come. Again, Jesus is using this code language in a sense that the religious leaders, remember when you see the word the Jews in John's gospel, this is not talking about all the Jewish people, far from it. John is simply referring to the Jewish authorities in this case. The eudoi is the word in Greek, the Jewish authorities who are in charge. But this theme, and I'll read it again, you will search for me, but you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come. Jesus may be quoting here, indirectly in some ways, from portions of the Hebrew Scriptures, portions of the Old Testament. So in Proverbs, for instance, one of the wisdom books in the Old Testament, there's a portion of Proverbs chapter 1, which will say, for those who are not in the know, again, those who do not know God, the author says, they will seek me diligently, but they shall not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. And again, in Amos chapter 8, in the prophets, the books of the prophets, Amos says in chapter 8, again, about those who are kind of wandering, lost, not knowing who God is. They will go to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, but they will not find it. So, and we find similar themes also in Job and Isaiah and Deuteronomy and prophet Hosea. So maybe Jesus lived, breathed Scripture. He knew it so well. He's not necessarily quoting anything here, but he's thought in terms of Scripture, so that just his speech would be revealing what he knew about Scripture. And maybe that's what's happening here, very possibly. So he says these words to the Jewish leaders, "You will search for me, but you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come." So the Jews don't understand this. And again, the Jewish leaders don't understand this. So here's the theme of misunderstanding that we see often in John's Gospel. The Jews said to one another, "Where does this man intend to go, that we will not find him?" So Jesus is talking, in a sense, metaphorically, in a way. They're thinking very much literally. Where's he going to go and hide? Does he intend to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks? What does he mean by saying, "You will search for me, and you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come"? So again, they're not quite getting it, are they? Which is, again, a common theme in John's Gospel. Then there's this section which will lead us to the end of the chapter about rivers of living water. Okay, Jesus talking about himself as a source of this living water. And as we saw with Jesus as the bread of life, as we saw with the Samaritan woman at the well, again, a source of living water, Jesus is taking a common theme, usually from Hebrew Scriptures or Hebrew tradition, the Jewish tradition, and he's sort of universalizing it for everyone. And so we saw, for instance, in the feeding miracle, there was this discussion afterwards about how God had given the manna from heaven as a physical bread in a sense, but Jesus actually offers more in that he's the bread of life. And we saw that too at Jacob's well with the Samaritan woman, and the woman's wanting this living water so she doesn't have to come back to the well anymore. So she's not really understanding that Jesus is talking in a spiritual way about living water, about him offering this water so that people will never thirst again, thirsting for the good news in a sense. So in verse 37, it starts out by saying, "On the last day of the festival," the very last day, the great day, while Jesus was standing there, he cried out, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me, and let the one who believes in me drink. As the Scripture has said, out of the believer's heart shall flow rivers of living water." Now, he said this about the Spirit, which believers in him were to receive, for as yet there was no Spirit, because Jesus was not yet glorified. This is John sort of giving us a parenthetical explanation, in a sense, of what Jesus means here. So what's really important about this piece is knowing a little bit of the background about the Feast of Tabernacles, because Tabernacles was a festival, Jewish festival, that was very rich in symbolism and very popular festival. A lot of people went to this. But it's what happened on the last day of the festival that Jesus is kind of playing off here, I think. Very symbolically, on this last day of the festival, there was this emphasis on water, and prayers were offered for a fertile season, a growing season, and prayers were offered for an abundance of water, rain in a sense, to make sure that the crops would grow correctly and that it would be an abundant year coming up. So again, Jesus is using a tradition from Jewish tradition in this Feast of Tabernacles, almost for a fertility prayer, you might say, in a sense. And he's adapting it and generalizing it for everyone and talking about himself as the source of this living water. And so this is another theme that comes up very often in John's Gospel, and in the Synoptics too, in some ways, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where there is this this very specific and very physical reference to something, bread, water, whatever it might be, and that Jesus then universalizes it and talks about it being for everyone and not just for a specific group of people, and not just in a physical sense, a literal sense, but also the prophet. Others said, "This is the Messiah." But some asked, "Surely the Messiah does not come from Galilee, does he? Has not the scripture said that the Messiah is descended from David and comes from Bethlehem, the village where David lived?" So there was a division in the crowd because of him. Some of them wanted to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him. So the crowd is not quite, getting it either. Some aren't getting it. Some are just thinking much more literally. Some are understanding Jesus to be who he is. Now, this is kind of ironic here in John's Gospel, what is being mentioned. Surely the Messiah does not come from Galilee. So they know Jesus comes from Galilee. That's where his home is. But then it says, "Has not the scripture said that the Messiah is descended from David and comes from Bethlehem, the village where David lived?" Well, of course, we know that from the birth narratives in Matthew and Luke, right? That Jesus was born in Bethlehem. We know that from those scriptures. And yet in John's Gospel, there's no mention of the birth narratives. There's no sense that we get in Matthew and Luke of Jesus being born in Bethlehem, the celebration of Christmas that we have every year, right? So it's kind of ironic that John is including this on the lips of the crowd, the Jewish crowd assembled, that the scripture says that the Messiah is descended from David and comes from Bethlehem, the village where David lived. So, sense of irony going on here. And then concluding the chapter, then the temple police went back to the chief priests and Pharisees, who asked them, "Why did you not arrest him?" The police answered, "Never has anyone spoken like this." Then the Pharisees replied, "Surely you have not been deceived too, have you?" So I apologize for this reference, but it reminds me of Jedi mind tricks in some ways. The temple police were going to arrest Jesus, and the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders, the chief priests, sent the temple police to do that. And when they got there and they heard what Jesus had to say, they said, "Never has anyone spoken like this." And then the Pharisees are saying to them, "Surely you have not been deceived too, have you?" It's kind of the equivalent in a sense of, these are not the droids you're looking for type of thing, right? So I found that to be kind of funny. Has any one of the authorities or the Pharisees believed in him? This is what the Jewish authorities are saying. Has any one of us actually believed in Jesus? But this crowd, which does not know the law, they are accursed. Nicodemus, who had gone to Jesus before and who was one of them, added, "Our law does not judge people without first giving them a hearing to find out what they are doing, does it?" They replied, "Surely you are not also from Galilee, are you? Search and you will see that no prophet is to arise from Galilee." So there is some sort of internal division going on here amongst the Jewish leadership here. Nicodemus being one. You remember Nicodemus came to Jesus at night, right? He came to Jesus when it was dark, and very, very symbolic in John's Gospel of those who are in the dark and those who come to Jesus, who is the light. And so Nicodemus here is starting to come around a little bit, because remember, he didn't fully understand in that early chapter when he came to Jesus at night who Jesus was, but now he's starting to understand. He's defending Jesus here in a sense by saying our law does not judge people without first giving them a hearing to find out what they are doing, does it? And he gets accused in some ways of being a follower of this Galilean. And he is reminded by the Jewish authorities that no prophet is to arise from Galilee. And so that's where the chapter ends. And that brings us to the close of chapter 7 in John's Gospel. And we will pick it up again in chapter 8 for the next time. And I hope you have maybe gleaned some new information from what we've talked about. And I always try to give some background to the Gospels to give us maybe a deeper understanding of what's going on here. And that deeper understanding hopefully speaks to us, speaks to our hearts, and enables this word to become a living word with us, and enables us to give us some real truths for our lives to live, especially as we we continue to hunker down and we continue to be isolated in this time. So let me give my final shout outs to who is on here. And let's see, where do we stop there? Chris, good to see you. You're on. Excellent. Hope you're doing well. Always enjoy Chris's Facebook posts because they make me laugh. They are great. Bob, good to see you. Hope you and Karen had a good Easter and hope your family's doing well. Ken Hoffner, good to see you on as well. Good morning to you. Let's see, we got Deborah is on this morning, and I'm glad you're watching. And Kathy Appleton, good to see you. Hope you and your family had a great Easter as well. Please say hi to Jay for me. And Richard, you're the last one on here, and good morning to you. And I'm glad you were able to join in this morning. So good to see everyone, at least your names, and good to be able to share the word with you again this morning. We will continue with chapter 8 at a future time. Until then, have a wonderful day, and I really pray that you will be blessed by this day in a way that maybe you're not expecting. Take care. Peace.